What's going on, fantasy owners? It is time for another edition of the Fantasy Football Stock Report for Week 7 of the 2012 season. Um, Again, with last week, thank you guys for your patience and understanding as I came back. This past week was a good week for me. I won my week this week, so I'm back in the saddle, and my chances of making the playoffs are going up. Hopefully, it's the same for you guys as well. This is the 5 to ride video. If you missed last week, the format has changed a little bit. I'm just now going to highlight 5 guys that I really like this week and 5 guys that maybe want to stray away from this week or kind of temper your expectations a bit and worry about a little bit in the 2 separate videos. So these are the guys that I really like this week that really have kind of had breakout weeks or guys that really have good matchups this week. So these are the guys I'm really high on this week. I highlight one player at each position and then give you one wild card to think about as well. So starting with the quarterback position this week. The guy that I'm actually really high on this week, and there's a lot of bye weeks this week. There's a lot of guys, studs that have to sit this week, like Matt Ryan, Michael Vick, Phillip Rivers. There's a lot of guys that you're going to not have this week that you normally play every single week. But there's a guy that's probably available in a lot of leagues that has really come on strong of late, and I know, I hate to admit it, over the years I haven't exactly been on the Tampa Bay bandwagon. I gave him an apology to Vincent Jackson, and now I'm giving the same thing to one Josh Freeman. I owe him a huge apology. This past week, granted, he was playing the Chiefs defense, and they're not exactly stud fantasy defense either. But the numbers lately, especially this past week, 15 to 26 for 328 yards, 3 touchdowns, had an interception, but still, that's 29 fantasy points. Freeman has looked very strong in these last couple weeks. He's got his targets. Obviously, Vincent Jackson. He's getting Mike Williams more involved in the offense, which is great to see. And he's utilizing Doug Martin in the passing game, which is also awesome to see that Martin is also bouncing back. So he's finding his guys that he likes to throw to. And this week has another favorable matchup. The Saints D has been a big-time disappointment this year. It's been basically fantasy butter. It's been really soft. And I really like Freeman's upside this week. So, I consider him a really sneaky number 2, but definitely worth a start if your number 1 is on a bye this week, or if you had Freeman on the bench all season behind these guys and you never even trusted him. Now is the week to plug him in. This is a great matchup for him. I think Freeman's going to do really well. I definitely think he's going to have at least 20-plus points this week for sure, because that Saints secondary has just been torn apart this year by a multitude of teams. Quickly, some other guys to mention that I'll give more on in my notes. RG3, Russell Wilson is another one to watch. I remember the subscriber that said that Russell Wilson, not Matt Flynn, would be the breakout guy in Seattle. Well, he's being proven right. And Brandon Whedon's another guy. So those are just some guys maybe want to plug in if your number 1s are struggling. Running backs, running back to ride this week. He's going to be probably was the number 1 waiver claim this week, and if you got him, you're going to really reap the benefits this week. It's Felix Jones of Dallas. DeMarco Murray, what a shocker. Goes down to an injury. He's had injury troubles now the past few years. Don't get me wrong, when Jones was hurt all last year, Murray had his breakout year. He shined and was a great waiver stud. But now Murray goes down with this foot injury. He could miss multiple weeks potentially due to this injury. So Jones gets another chance to shine, and he literally ran with it against a much weaker Ravens defense that now has been blasted by injury. 18 carries for 92 yards with a score, plus had 1 catch for 13 yards. So 16 fantasy points, not a bad week at all for Felix Jones. But this week, you got to get him. You got to get him in your starting lineups. He couldn't ask for a juicier matchup. Carolina's D this season has been absolutely destroyed by teams. He's my running back start this week. He should be owned at this point in all leagues and should definitely be plugged into lineups this week. I think he's going to be one of the highest scoring running backs of the week, but when it's all said and done, because like I said, Carolina has not done much in terms of shutting down running backs this year. Definitely go with Felix Jones this week. I think you'll definitely reap the benefits. Other guys that I'll highlight in my notes that I post on my Facebook page, of course, I'll talk about Shonn Greene's performance. that definitely came out of left field, out of nowhere, but maybe we should have seen it coming considering it was the Colts defense. Montario Hardesty of Cleveland, speaking of guys with injuries, you got to check on Trent Richardson's status this week, see if he's going to play through that rib injury. If not, Hardesty's going to be the guy. LeGarrette Blount, speaking of Tampa Bay, he's stealing touchdowns away, unfortunately, from Doug Martin fantasy owners like me. So maybe Blount's a sneaky play this week. And yes, Chris Johnson, amazingly, had a good game against Pittsburgh, but will that follow? Check my notes for more information. Wide receivers, onto the wideout position. I never thought I'd say this name again, but I highlighted this guy in my preview as a guy that maybe could have a big breakout season because I knew that the guy behind him was not going to have a very big year. The wide receiver you want to ride this week if you're desperate or at least looking for a guy with upside is Denarius Moore in Oakland. Again, a juicy matchup going against the Jaguars, who have been completely carved up this season, even got carved up by Jay Cutler and the Bears, which is just, that's kind of a surprise in and of itself, considers Cutler is not one of the elite among fantasy quarterbacks. But you can't ignore the stats that he's put up in this matchup this week. You know, we haven't had to talk a lot about the Oakland offense because also, speaking of not elite quarterbacks, Carson Palmer is not one of them. He's more of a second, third tier guy. And you know you're starting Darren McFadden when he's healthy. So, but he's got his number one weapon back and more. He clearly prefers, I think, throwing to him more than Darius Hayward-Bay, who, of course, missed time this season with that concussion and neck injury that he suffered on that hit. You know, I think Palmer's a much happier guy with Moore back in the lineup. I said Moore was leaps and bounds above DHB, and I meant it, and it's definitely showing here. And this was against, this performance, 5 catches for 104 yards and a score. This was against a Falcons team that came into this game undefeated. Granted, the Falcons still won the game, but this was a definitely strong performance by Moore. And again, with the matchup against the Jags, I don't think you can go wrong here. I think you could start Moore with confidence. A number 2, number 3 receiver with definitely serious upside this week. I think Moore, I project him as probably top 10, top 15 for the week for sure, considering I think he'll definitely at least get one score, maybe 70, 80 yards again, at least double-digit fantasy points. He definitely should against this Jaguars secondary and this Jaguars D that just has not shown up this season. I think you can definitely start Denarius Moore with confidence, or if one of your top receivers is on a bye, guys like Deshaun Jackson or Malcolm Floyd maybe in San Diego, or you got Roddy White and Julio Jones in Atlanta. You can definitely plug in Denarius Moore as a suitable replacement this week, considering this great matchup. Other guys I like at the wideout position, real quick. We got to start talking about Josh Gordon in Cleveland. He's developing a strong rapport with Brandon Weeden. I picked him up off of waivers this week to be my number 4 guy right now, but he's certainly starting to break out. Granted, the only downside to Gordon is he doesn't get a lot of targets. Cleveland really is not a massive throwing team because Gordon has only stepped up because a lot of his receivers, Muhammad Massaquoi, Travis Benjamin, have been out due to injury. So that's the only reason really that Gordon is stepping up. But you hope that if you're taking a shot on Gordon, that this trend and this rapport with Brandon Weeden will continue in Cleveland. So the only downside is he doesn't get a whole lot of targets, but you can't ignore the fact that he's making long plays for touchdowns. So that's how I see Gordon as right now. Number 4 for the long term, but could be a sneaky number 3 start this week. It's the Colts. They just got carved up by the Jets. So maybe a sneaky number 3. I wouldn't be surprised if Gordon gets another touchdown again this week. I'm taking a shot in the dark on him, but hey, I'm 2-4 right now, so I'm looking for any options that I can. So certainly worth a look if he's out there. Another guy that maybe could be breaking out in Minnesota. We know about Percy Harvin. We now know about Kyle Rudolph. And by the way, great for me last week. I got him off waivers, 13 fantasy points. Hello, if he's still out in your league, you should still get him. Michael Jenkins had an actually interesting week this past week. Had 6 catches for 67 yards and a touchdown. I believe was targeted 10 times. So, Harvin, if the defense is going to start bottling up on him, if good defense is playing, you got to look for another guy to step up. And with Jerome Simpson out with that back and leg issue, maybe Jenkins is the guy to emerge as that third weapon in Minnesota. So they face the Cardinals, though, this week. It's kind of a tougher matchup. I see Jenkins more maybe number 3, number 4 guy for that matchup. Only if you're desperate and need maybe a 1-week replacement. Maybe you take a look at Jenkins this week. He might not get you that touchdown this week against that tough Cardinal secondary, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see what happens there. And then one more guy, which I'll talk about in my notes, and I've talked about him off and on, Randall Cobb in Green Bay. Of course, the Green Bay situation, though, is so fluid because if Greg Jennings is still out this week with that groin issue, other guys usually step up. This past week it was Jordy Nelson. Another week it could be James Jones, although Jones still had a good week last week. Cobb had over 100 yards. So, again, it's really fluid on who's going to be on a week-by-week basis with Jennings out, considering Rodgers has all his weapons to throw to. By the way, if you're an Aaron Rodgers owner like me, I think you definitely won your fantasy week this week. Hello, 50 points? Yeah, at least in a CBS league. But, again, you might want to temper expectations on him. I see Cobb as a decent number 3 this week against the Rams, but remember, the question is, who are the Rams going to make invisible? They made Brian Hartline practically invisible last week, so who are they going to try to shut down this week? That'll be the interesting thing to see. But the nice thing about Green Bay is they have so many weapons that I think some guys will still do well, so take a look there. And finally, the tight end this week, Aaron Hernandez. He's back. He's back in New England. He's back at playing. 6 catches, 30 yards, had the touchdown for 9 fantasy points. Ahern, I like to call him Ahern, Aaron Hernandez, Ahern. But he's back at full steam. He actually was targeted more times than Rob Gronkowski's, 9 times to 8. Granted, that's still a fairly even timeshare. But it was Hernandez that got the score, and we like scores in fantasy football. So you can safely consider him in your lineups again. But the downside is they're facing a Jets defense. They just shut down Reggie Wayne and the Colts. Obviously, you're not sitting either of these guys, either Ahern or Gronk, but just temper your expectations a little bit considering what this Jets D can do. I like both guys. Maybe it's more aligned number 2 options this week. The one guy I do want to delve in more on Shonn Greene's performance. I'll give you him as the wild card. We'll stick with the Jets. I'll give you Shonn Greene. We were not expecting this, honestly. I think every talking heads and pundits that they were saying to sit him, myself included, I'm sorry. But it was a good matchup. The Colts D is clearly tends to give up a lot, especially against the run. So maybe if you stuck with Shonn Greene, if you were confident in him, hey, you reap the rewards. 32 carries for 161 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's 34 points in a CBS league. But the question going to be going forward for Green owners is this a fluke or is this a trend? Is this kind of performance going to continue for him, or was this just a one-week thing? For now, because of that matchup, I still say it's a fluke, but because of all the buys, you might not have a whole lot of better options out there this week unless you find something juicy on the waiver wire. So they're going up against the Patriots this week. That defense, it's kind of hard to tell. They've been tough at times. They've been weak at others. I think Greene this week, I'm going to look at him as a number 2 guy with some upside based on this performance. But again, you just don't know if Greene's going to disappear this week or not. Obviously, he's the main back. It also helps now that a guy behind him, Joe McKnight, Bilal Powell, they're struggling with injuries. So obviously now Greene is the main guy. So he's going to get the bulk of the work. But how much is he going to produce out of it? That's the big question. So just kind of temper expectations, see what happens. If he puts up another double-digit week, then I think we can be okay with Shonn Greene going forward. All right, guys, those are the guys that I like you to ride with this week. Hopefully we'll turn into a Week 7 victory for you. Don't forget to check out the 5 to Avoid video as well, and my Facebook notes, which I will link to on here and on my YouTube channel as well, the same notes that I use in the show and in the videos. So thank you guys so much, and good luck in Week 7. Take care.